I sat frozen as Mark stumbled into the room, his eyes bloodshot from whiskey, his hand clenched around a black metal pistol that gleamed under the yellow light. Every detail of that weapon screaming death. The polished barrel reflecting the faint shimmer of the lamp, the grip heavy and solid in his hand, and for one unbearable moment, I believed this was the last image I would ever see. The man I once called husband aiming cold steel at my forehead, his breath ragged, his jaw twisted with rage, his voice slashing the air as he shouted, "Obey me, or you will not see, tomorrow," each word sharp enough to cut my chest open. And from the doorway, Evelyn stood with her arms crossed, her eyes narrow, her mouth curled into that cruel smile I had learned to hate, and she whispered almost tenderly, but with poison on her tongue, "Do as he says, Clara. A wife has no right but to submit." Her words were not comfort, but a verdict sealing me in this coffin of a marriage. And I knew at that second that every humiliation, every bruise, every night of silence, had been building to this a gun at my head and an ultimatum that carried the weight of life and death. I felt my body shake, but I forced my face still because panic was what he wanted. Surrender was what she expected, but I would not give them that victory. So I drew in a slow breath and felt the corner of my mouth curve into a smile, small but deliberate, a signal of defiance, and I said, "Then look at this," my voice low yet steady. Mark's eyes narrowed further. His finger tightened on the trigger. The sound that followed was a thunderclap in the narrow room, a deafening bang that seemed to tear through the walls, the kind of sound that makes your heart stop, the kind of sound that usually means someone's world has ended. Evelyn gasped, clutching the door frame, expecting blood to spray, expecting me to collapse, but instead, icy water shot out from the barrel and splashed across my face, soaking my hair dripping onto my clothes, running down the table beside me, the cold sting shocking yet strangely liberating. Mark froze as if lightning had struck him, his mouth open in disbelief. He stared at the gun as though it had betrayed him, his hand trembling with confusion, and Evelyn's eyes widened with horror as she realized this was not the weapon of power they believed it to be, but something else, something twisted against them. Mark barked, "What the hell is this?" His voice cracking with fury, and I let out a breath, wiped the water from my cheek, and met his stare with fire in my eyes, saying, "That is the only thing you can shoot now." My tone sharp, cutting deeper than the fake gun ever could. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Evelyn tried to speak, but only managed a strangled sound. Mark raised the weapon again, as if trying to force it into reality. His knuckles white, his face red, but deep down he already knew he had lost control. The room was no longer his. The terror he thought he commanded had backfired, and the trap I had set was already closing around him, though he had not yet understood just how tightly it would squeeze, and as the water dripped from my chin to the floor, I felt the strange mix of fear, still clawing at my stomach, and the fierce satisfaction that the first strike had landed not on me, but on him, and this was only the beginning, because the bang that echoed through the room had not ended my life. It had ended his illusion of power. The room still reeked of whiskey and fear when the sound of the fake shot stopped echoing, but to understand how we reached that night with Mark pressing a weapon against my skull, you have to step back, because on the surface my life looked enviable. A pretty house tucked into a quiet suburb, trimmed hedges, neighbors who waved as they watered their lawns, the kind of picture that could fit into a postcard. Yet inside those beige walls, it felt more like a cage, and every corner of it reminded me who really owned my time, my choices, my breath, because Mark never let me forget it. He controlled the bank account, the car keys, even the code to the Wi-Fi. Everything filtered through him like I was a child who needed permission, and every time I resisted, his mother. Evelyn sharpened her tongue like a blade. She would lean close and whisper with a condescending sweetness, "You should be grateful he picked you. Clara, without him, you would have nothing." And if I answered back, her eyes would harden and she would say, A wife's duty is not to fight, it is to serve, and those words dug deeper than any slap, because they twisted obedience into morality, turned my silence into proof of loyalty. So I learned to nod, to lower my voice, to act small, but inside I kept a record. Every insult, every bruise, every time I was told I was worthless, it all went into a secret ledger no one could erase, because while they thought they were breaking me, they were really teaching me how far I would go to break free. On Sundays, Evelyn insisted on family dinners, elaborate spreads laid out like we were a clan of royalty, roasted chicken salads, too much wine. But behind the polished silverware, the atmosphere was suffocating. Mark barking small corrections at me, telling me I chewed too slow, too fast, that I poured his glass wrong, and Evelyn would smirk like a queen, overseeing her servant, sometimes throwing in little jabs like, "Perhaps if you had been raised better, you would know how to keep a man satisfied." And Mark would laugh not loudly, but with that cruel curl at the corner of his mouth. Enough to remind me he agreed, and I would sit there forcing food past a throat that wanted to close, pretending I did not notice how my hands trembled on the fork, pretending I did not care when the neighbors probably thought we were the perfect couple. They never saw how Mark locked the bedroom door after arguments, how he shoved me against the wall when I asked about money, how he slammed his fist on the counter until the dishes rattled, and Evelyn always excused it with her poisonous calm. Men are passionate. Clara, strong husbands show discipline. It is your job to endure. And when I tried to explain to her that discipline felt like bruises on my arms, she simply shook her head and told me not to dramatize that women who exaggerate drive their men away. And for a while, I wondered if she was right, if maybe I was too weak, too loud, too needy. But then I caught my own reflection one night, a hollow-eyed stranger staring back at me in the bathroom mirror, and I promised her silently that I would not let this become the rest of my life. It was small things at first, hiding a little cash when I could memorizing passwords, Mark carelessly left open on his laptop, tucking away recordings on an old flash drive, because deep down I knew I could not fight them head on. Not yet, but someday, and every fake smile at dinner, every forced, "Yes, dear," every nod to Evelyn's lectures was not submission, but camouflage, waiting until I had enough pieces to expose them. Because if I had learned anything in that house, it was that silence might keep you breathing for a night, but strategy could keep you alive for good. It was during one of those suffocating afternoons that I discovered the truth, the moment that shifted everything from humiliation to war. Mark had left his briefcase open in the study papers, spilling across the desk in his usual careless way. And while I tidied, I saw the crisp edges of documents with my name on them, neat black letters stacked into paragraphs of betrayal. He was preparing to transfer every piece of property, every bank account, every joint investment into Evelyn's name, erasing me from the picture as if I had never existed, my signature line already printed, waiting to be filled, my future already stolen. And I stood there, staring at those papers with my throat burning, realizing that they did not just want to control me day by day. They wanted to erase me entirely, to leave me with nothing, to make sure if I ever walked away, I would crawl in poverty while they lived fat off what had once been mine too. I could almost hear Evelyn's smug voice echoing, "You were never fit to share this family's wealth," and Mark's drunken laugh backing her up as though I had been a guest overstaying my welcome. And in that instant, the walls of that house felt like a prison closing tighter. When I confronted Mark later, his face turned from shock to fury. He lunged across the room, slammed me against the wall so hard the pictures rattled his voice. A snarl. "You think you can question me. You think you have rights. You are mine, Clara, mine to command, mine to silence." And Evelyn came in as if on cue, her expression calm, almost bored, as she said, "He has every right. Dear, a man provides, a woman obeys, and if you are smart, you will stop fighting before he makes you." And those words spoken so casually hit harder than his fists, because they told me she was not just blind to his violence, she was the architect of it. She had raised him to believe control was love, and now she coached him to destroy me under the same lie. That night, I lay awake, listening to his snores, my body aching from where his hands had left their marks, and I understood finally that survival was no longer about enduring. It was about planning, and I would not let them strip me of dignity and freedom, not when I still had my mind. I started small testing boundaries. He did not notice placing an old phone under the couch to record arguments, saving voice notes of Evelyn's cutting lectures, hiding a miniature camera in the bookshelf facing the dining table, because I knew words could be twisted, but images never lied. And while they mocked me as weak and fragile, I was building a case brick by brick. They thought they were closing the trap on me by drafting those papers, but what they did not know was that I was preparing a trap of my own, and one day soon, when Mark shoved those documents under my nose and barked, "Sign," the real signature would not be on paper, but on the footage I had collected, the proof that would bring them both down, and every moment of cruelty would serve as evidence, every insult recorded, every blow documented, because if they wanted war, then I would make sure their empire of fear collapsed under the weight of their own actions. The day came faster than I expected, a storm brewing in the walls of that house long before the clouds outside turned dark. Mark returned from work with his jaw tight and his eyes glassy from drink. Evelyn trailing behind him with a folder clutched like a prize. They did not bother with pleasantries, no fake smiles, no charade of family harmony. Instead, Mark slammed the folder on the table so hard the glasses shook, and he said flatly, "Sign these, Clara, tonight," his tone carrying no room for negotiation. Evelyn moved closer, her perfume sharp and suffocating, and she said softly, as if delivering advice, "A smart woman knows when to stop resisting. A foolish woman ends up alone, her voice low but venomous." I opened the folder and found exactly what I had seen before the documents that stripped me of everything. Page after page, filled with neat paragraphs designed to erase me from existence, the black ink cold and final, the pen already placed on top as though I had no choice but to use it. I looked at Mark's face, twisted with arrogance, veins bulging at his temples, and for a moment I remembered the boyish charm he had once shown me years ago, the fake kindness that had lured me into this cage. But that illusion was dead. What stood before me was not a husband but a tyrant in his own home, a man who thought fear was the only language worth speaking. I closed the folder gently and said, "No." My voice steady, though. My chest pounded, and that single word seemed to ignite him like a match to gasoline. His fist hit the table again. He leaned over me so close I could smell the sourness of whiskey on his breath, his voice rising to a roar. "You will regret this. Clara, I will make sure you regret it." And Evelyn stepped closer, her eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction as she whispered, "He will not ask again, dear. He is offering you mercy. Now do not throw it away." But I sat straighter and repeated, "No," louder this time, and the air in the room shifted thick with rage. Mark's face went scarlet. His hand shot out to grab my wrist, and he yanked me to my feet, twisting hard enough to make me cry out. He shoved me toward the wall and pinned me there with the weight of his body, his other hand gripping my chin, forcing me to face him. "Sign the papers," he hissed, "or I swear you will not live to see another sunrise." My heart thundered, the sharp edge of fear slicing through me, but beneath it burned something stronger, defiance, and even as my arms shook, I spat back, "I am not signing. Not today. Not ever." He recoiled as though the words themselves had stung him, and in that instant I saw the line I had drawn no more, pretending. No more camouflage. I had declared war, and he knew it. Evelyn gasped like a spectator at a duel. Her hand pressed against her chest, but she did not intervene. She wanted to see me broken. She wanted to watch me crawl. Mark released me, only to reach into the drawer and pull out the gun, heavy metallic black, the very image of power in his hands, and my blood ran cold. I had expected shouting blows, even threats, but not this escalation. Not so soon. He raised the weapon and pressed the barrel against my temple, the chill of it making my skin crawl. His lips peeled back in a snarl. "Obey me, or you will not see tomorrow." And Evelyn's voice came from behind, like a chorus of doom. "Do as he says. Clara, be a good wife. Obey." But instead of collapsing into terror, I locked my gaze on his. I let the silence stretch heavy between us. And then I whispered, "Look at this." My eyes darting briefly to the corner where the small red light of the hidden camera blinked steadily. Mark's eyes flickered in confusion and then narrowed. He sneered, "You think anyone cares about your little tricks? You think anyone will save you?" And he squeezed the trigger. The room exploded with a deafening bang! The kind of sound that splits eardrums, that makes time freeze. Evelyn screamed, expecting blood, expecting my body to crumple. But instead, a jet of cold water blasted from the barrel, spraying across my face, soaking my clothes, dripping onto the floor. The shock of it almost comical if not for the fury on Mark's face. He stared at the gun in disbelief, his voice breaking. "What the hell? What is this?" And I wiped water from my cheek with a slow, deliberate motion and answered, "That is the only thing you can shoot now." My voice sharp as glass. Evelyn covered her mouth, horrified. Mark pulled the trigger again. Another bang! Another splash of water. His hand shook with rage as he realized he had been tricked, and for the first time since our marriage began, it was not me who stood cornered. It was him, because his power, his ultimate threat, had been stripped away, and he knew nothing was more dangerous than a victim who stopped being afraid. Mark's face twisted with disbelief as the second useless burst of water sprayed across the room, dripping from the ceiling, running down his arm, pooling on the floor, his mouth working like a fish out of water, trying to turn rage into words, but choking on his own fury. Evelyn clutched the doorframe as though the house itself were collapsing, her eyes darting from the gun to my face, her voice breaking. "What did you do? What did you do?" And I let the silence stretch before I answered, my voice, calm, steady, deliberate. "Smile. You are on record." I tilted my chin slightly toward the corner where the camera's small red light blinked with quiet authority, the proof that everything he had done, every shove, every threat, every word dripping with violence was now preserved forever. Mark spun, spotting the lens, and with a roar, he raised the gun and fired again, another deafening bang, another rush of water spraying like a mockery, the sound reverberating like thunder but leaving nothing but dampness behind. His scream tore from his throat. "This is impossible. This is not real." But it was real, every drop soaking his clothes, every frame caught on camera. Evelyn shrieked, "Destroy it! Mark, destroy the camera!" Her command sharp, but her son only turned wild eyes back to me as if I were the true enemy, as if I had stripped him naked in front of the world. He lunged toward me, gripping the weapon like a club now, but the water still streamed from the barrel uselessly, his dominance melting with every futile trigger pull. I stared at him, refusing to flinch, saying evenly, "You thought you were the hunter, but you were always the prey. You just did not see the trap until it closed." The words hit him harder than any blow. His chest heaved, veins bulging. Evelyn rushed forward, her nails clawing at my arm, hissing, "You vile little witch! You set us up! You dare turn this family into a spectacle!" I shoved her back, the years of swallowing humiliation pouring out of me in that one push. She stumbled against the wall, shocked that I had finally dared to fight back. I whispered, "Not a spectacle, a record. The truth you tried to bury, and it will bury you instead." Mark's eyes darted again toward the camera, sweat and water dripping down his temples, his voice trembling. "You think anyone will believe this? You think anyone will side with you? You are nothing without me. Clara, nothing." Yet the way his hand shook proved he no longer believed his own words. The weapon that had once given him power now made him a fool, every squeeze of the trigger mocking him with its hollow thunder and spray of water, his power evaporating drop by drop. Evelyn's face turned pale as she finally realized the nightmare was no longer mine, but theirs. She reached for her son's arm, trying to steady him, whispering, "We can still fix this. We can still silence her." But I laughed a sharp, dry sound because for the first time it was not me who was silent. Not me, who was silenced, and I said loudly, "Enough! Every word you speak is being recorded, every threat, every scheme, and the more you talk, the deeper you sink." Evelyn's hand dropped as though I had slapped her. Mark lowered the gun for a second, breathing hard, before lifting it again in a last desperate bluff, pulling the trigger until the chamber wheezed out nothing but sputtering water. The sight was almost pitiful, the mighty tyrant reduced to a clown with a toy. Except the toy still looked lethal enough to convict him, because intent mattered more than bullets, and his intent was written all over his face. He stared at me drenched and shaking with rage, and I stared back drenched too, but unbroken, knowing that this was not the end of the battle, but the beginning of the reckoning. And to understand how I found the strength to face him without flinching, to see why I stood tall when he thought I would kneel, you have to know what came before the years of silence that turned into strategy, the pain that hardened into resolve because the trap that just closed on him did not appear overnight. It was built piece by piece in the shadows of his cruelty. To understand how I stood in that room soaked in water yet unbroken while Mark raged like a cornered animal, you need to know the path that led me there, because nothing about that night was chance. It was built from the fragments of years of silence turned into strategy. I was not born fearless. I was shaped by neglect, sharpened by cruelty, and tested by people who believed breaking me would be easier than underestimating me. As a child, I lived in a house where love was rationed to those who performed, and I was the one who never met the quota. My older brother collected medals and praise. My younger sister was coddled for every stumble. But me, I was the one they looked through unless I caused trouble. I learned quickly that bad attention was still attention, so I made noise. I ran away in the night just to be dragged back. I climbed fences until my knees bled. I threw tantrums at dinner just to hear my father's voice, thunder even if it was in anger. My mother sighed that I was a disappointment. My father warned me I would never amount to anything. I carried that hunger to be seen into adulthood, and when Mark appeared, he looked straight at me with eyes that seemed to promise I was visible at last. He noticed the details no one else did. He spoke softly, he told me I was special, and I believed him. When he said, "Quit your job, I can take care of you," I thought it was love when he asked for my passwords. I thought it was intimacy when he dictated what I should wear. I thought it was protection. By the time I realized those walls were not shields but bars, I was already locked inside. Evelyn reinforced every brick she praised Mark as a strong man, told me I should be grateful, told me obedience was dignity. At first, I fought back with words, but words became useless in a house where no one listened. I learned to nod, to appear smaller, but inside I kept count. Every bruise, every insult, every slammed door went into a secret ledger. The turning point came one night when Tom, my younger brother, pulled me aside during a family dinner. His face was pale, his voice tight. "I overheard them," he whispered. "Mark and Evelyn. They're planning something." My chest tightened. He explained that they were discussing how to move assets out of my reach, how to force me into signing papers, and how to make sure I would never tell anyone. His words confirmed what I had already suspected from the open briefcase, the documents waiting for my signature. I wanted to deny it to pretend my marriage was not a coffin being nailed shut, but deep down I knew Tom was right. The look in his eyes told me he feared for me more than I feared for myself. That fear did not paralyze me, it pushed me to plan. I reached out to a private investigator named Miller. He listened quietly as I described years of abuse, the control, the threats, the documents, and Tom's warning. When I finished, he leaned back and said bluntly, "I can keep you safe only if you leave, but if you insist on staying, then we must build a case that no one can dismiss." His honesty cut through the fog. Leaving with nothing would mean Mark and Evelyn still controlled my life from afar. Exposing them would mean true freedom, so I told him I was not running. He sighed, then nodded, and we began. Miller's team swept the house while Mark was away. They installed cameras behind vents, inside, clocks in the hollow of a smoke detector. They hid recorders and furniture lenses in picture frames. Every room where Mark's temper flared was covered. Every insult Evelyn whispered was preserved. I became part actress, part conspirator. I smiled when ordered, obeyed when watched, but every movement fed the cameras. Miller compiled hours of evidence until it became a mountain no lawyer could ignore. Then came the weapon. Miller said, "We know he has a firearm. He will use it. Do you want us to disarm him now or let him incriminate himself?" My stomach twisted. The thought of that barrel against my head made bile rise in my throat. But I remembered Evelyn's voice telling me over and over that a wife's duty was to obey, that bruises were discipline, that silence was loyalty. I remembered Mark's snarl that I was nothing without him, and I thought of Tom's pale face warning me that this would not stop unless I ended it. I looked at Miller and said, "Do it. Make sure he cannot kill me, but let him reveal himself." They replaced the weapon days before the confrontation. It looked identical, the same weight, the same shine of the barrel, the same cold steel grip. But inside the chamber was no bullet. Instead, there was a pressure system built to release a stream of icy water, the mechanics fitted with a sound device so that when the trigger was pulled, it exploded with a deafening bang. To anyone holding it or anyone watching it was indistinguishable from a real gun until the truth revealed itself in water. On the morning of the day he tried to force me, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the light spilling across the carpet. I told myself if they showed kindness that day, maybe, just maybe I could forgive. Maybe I could share what I had left. But when Evelyn sneered at breakfast that wives should never speak at the table unless spoken to, when Mark shoved me for serving coffee too slowly, I knew there would be no kindness there never had been. That was the moment I accepted that justice was not about hope, it was about proof. So I played my role. I followed them into the room when they summoned me. I opened the folder of documents when they demanded I sign. I said no, not once, not twice, but over and over. And as Mark's face reddened, as Evelyn's eyes glinted with triumph, as the gun appeared from the drawer and pressed against my skin, I forced myself not to tremble, because trembling would give them victory. I remembered Miller's voice telling me the cameras were live, that the gun had already been switched, that all I needed to do was hold my ground long enough for them to damn themselves. When Mark's finger tightened on the trigger, I did not close my eyes. I looked straight at him. I thought of every year I had been silenced, every bruise I had hidden, every whisper Evelyn had used to strip me of dignity, and I smiled because I knew the power he worshipped was gone the moment he pulled that trigger. It would not be my end. It would be his. The instant the second useless burst of water sprayed from the barrel, the door behind Evelyn flew open with a crash that shook the frame, and in stormed Miller with two uniformed officers, their boots heavy, their presence absolute, and for the first time, I saw fear break across Mark's face. Not fear of me, but fear of authority. The kind of fear bullies feel when they realize the playground is no longer theirs. He staggered back, still clutching the dripping gun as if it might somehow redeem itself. But Miller's voice cut sharp and final. "Put it down now, Mark, or this ends worse for you." Mark barked back. "It is mine! She is my wife! She belongs to me! You cannot take her from me!" But the words were hollow even to him. The officers moved in with steady precision. Guns drawn, real ones, gleaming with lethal weight, and the sight made his toy look pathetic. Mark swung the water gun toward them, his hand shaking so violently the barrel wavered like a broken compass. Evelyn screamed, "Don't you see? It is all family business. You have no right to be here." But Miller's answer was cold. "Assault is not family business. Clara is under protection and you two are under arrest." Mark's defiance collapsed in an instant. His finger pulled the trigger, one last desperate time. Another thunderous bang filled the air, followed by nothing but water splattering across the floor. The officers did not flinch. They surged forward, tackling him, pinning him face down, his arms twisted behind his back, the weapon skittering uselessly across the tiles. Mark screamed and cursed, spitting into the floor. "She tricked me. She did this. It is not real. You cannot take me." But the cuffs locked tight around his wrists silenced the fantasy that he was untouchable. Evelyn lunged toward me, shrieking, "You poisoned him! You turned my son against his own blood!" Her hands clawing at the air as if she could tear the cameras off the walls. But one officer caught her mid-stride, shoving her against the wall, snapping cold metal cuffs onto her wrists. Her voice broke into sobs. "You cannot do this! You cannot shame us like this! We are respected. We are family." But Miller leaned close and said calmly, "Everything is already recorded. Every bruise, every threat, every word. Clara endured. You did this to yourselves. The mighty matriarch who once lorded over me with her perfect posture and cruel words now stood slumped against the wall, hair falling from its pins, mascara running in streaks across her cheeks, her voice cracking with panic. Not power, the mask shattered, and I felt a strange justice watching her stripped of the authority she had wielded like a weapon. The room seemed to exhale, then the tension bleeding out replaced by the sharp rattle of cuffs and the scrape of boots on the wet floor. I stood, shaking soaked through, but unbroken, watching Mark thrash like a trapped animal, his voice muffled against the floor. "You think this will hold me? You think anyone will believe her?" But the red lights on the cameras blinked back like dozens of unblinking eyes, and the officers ignored his pleas, dragging him upright. Evelyn wept against the wall, her lips trembling around curses she could not finish. I felt no pity, only a strange, heavy relief like chains slipping off my shoulders. Miller approached me, placed a steady hand on my arm, and said, "It is over. Clara, you are safe now," and for the first time in years I believed those words, because when they hauled Mark and Evelyn out past the flashing red and blue lights of the patrol cars and into the whispers of neighbors who had once thought we were the perfect family, I knew their empire of fear had ended not in silence behind closed doors, but in public with every eye watching. And when Evelyn's gaze locked on mine, one final time, she hissed, "You will regret this." But I shook my head and answered evenly, "No, Evelyn, you will." The days that followed blurred into paperwork court hearings, interviews with lawyers, and endless recountings of what had happened in that room, yet beneath the exhaustion, there was a steady current of relief pulsing through me because for once I was not the one on trial. It was them, and the weight of their cruelty was finally exposed. In the light they had spent years hiding from Mark sat in the defendant's chair, his hair slicked back but his eyes wild every time the recordings played his voice on tape. Snarling threats, the images of him shoving me, the weapon in his hand blasting only water, but paired with his words, it was enough to convict. The jury's faces hardened with every frame, and Evelyn sat beside him, her mouth pursed tight, trying to hold on to dignity as if it were a shield, but the evidence stripped her bare too. Her whispers caught on tape, her complicity undeniable, and no amount of tears or excuses could wash it away. When the verdict came, it was swift. Mark was sentenced to 15 years in prison for assault coercion and attempted intimidation with a deadly weapon, the judge reminding him that the intent and terror he inflicted mattered more than whether the gun-fired bullets Evelyn received 5 years for conspiracy and aiding his abuse. Her gasp echoing across the courtroom as if shocked that her matriarch mask had not protected her. I did not cheer. I did not even smile. I simply breathed for the first time in years because justice was not about joy. It was about release. And in that moment, I felt the bars of the invisible cage finally dissolve. Life after the trial was not simple. Scars did not vanish overnight. I still woke some nights drenched in sweat, hearing the phantom echo of that bang, still flinched when doors slammed, but each day the space inside me grew wider, less cramped by fear, more open to possibility. I moved into a modest house painted white with soft curtains that swayed in the morning breeze, the kind of home that felt like mine. Not because it was grand, but because no one dictated how I lived in it. I bought groceries without hearing criticism, cooked meals without watching over my shoulder, walked outside without asking permission. Freedom tasted simple and exquisite. With the settlement of assets returned to me, I chose not to hoard. I used part of it to create a small foundation for women trapped in violent homes, offering legal help, safe housing, and the chance to escape without losing everything. Because I knew too well that money was one of the strongest chains abusers used to bind their victims. Breaking it meant breaking the cycle, and when the first woman walked through our doors and cried into my arms, thanking me, I realized healing was not just personal, it was communal and giving back stitched parts of me together I thought were gone forever. Tom remained by my side through it all, the brother who had believed me when no one else did. He finished college with my help, started his own career, and every time I saw him smile freely, I felt the echo of gratitude. Because without him, I might not have found the strength to fight, and Miller, the investigator who had risked his reputation to set the trap, became a reminder that not all strangers turn away some step into the fire with you. I stayed in touch with him not as a client anymore, but as a friend, one who understood that surviving is one thing, but reclaiming life is another. Years later, when I stood in the yard holding my daughter's hand, watching her chase bubbles across the grass, her laughter carrying into the warm evening, I thought back to that night with the gun that was not a gun, the water dripping down my face, the camera's red light blinking, and I realized that moment had not been the end of me, but the beginning. The night Mark thought he ended my tomorrow was the night I started to build it, brick by brick, choice by choice, and every time my daughter runs free, I know she will never grow up believing submission is her only role. She will know that silence protects no one. She will know that obedience without respect is a prison, and she will know that her mother chose freedom even when it meant walking through fire. They thought control was power, but real power is choosing freedom and using it not only to heal yourself, but to light the way for others still trapped in the dark and sometimes late at night when the world is quiet. I still hear the echo of that bang, but instead of fear, it reminds me of the night I broke the cage and stepped into my life. If you were with me through this story, you know how heavy silence can be and how powerful truth becomes when it finally breaks free. Do you believe justice always finds its way, even inside the darkest families? Tell me what you think in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this of survival betrayal and hard-won freedom, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, because every story we share is a reminder that control is not power. Freedom is.